Jason Mitchell.
And I'm E.T. Mobley.
Welcome to today's episode of this Funkin' Life podcast. In today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about our favorite funk albums of all time. So let's get into it. I'm going to start out with James Brown because he is the father of us all as far as the funk is concerned. And the tricky thing about James is he made so many albums. He made well over 100 albums. At one point, I collected almost all of them. But the problem with a lot of his albums is you get a couple of good cuts that were the hits, and then the rest of it's like filler. It's like show tunes or torch songs or things that, you don't necessarily want. Or maybe it's the 10th remake of Please, Please, Please or something else. It's not that they're not great, it's just, as far as a concept, the funk album kind of came to fruition with Stand by Sly and the Family Stone, where every cut is awesome. Every song, it may not all be funk, but it's all great. And there was a theme behind it. So we're going to stick with the albums that are great to listen to all the way through by some of our favorite artists. And my first one, and we're going to go in chronological order here. My first one is from 1970, which is the part studio, part live Sex Machine double LP. This is really a landmark record because that song is obviously one of the classic funk jams of all time, Sex Machine. Right. James was a funny guy. He would do things in the studio to kind of put one over on people because his live albums always did so well at retail. So Sex Machine has a lot of dubbed in audiences, fake live ambiance, if you will. Right. But most of it is a live album. So there's a couple of the new cuts like Sex Machine. He had a younger band at the time because the rest of the older guys had left. So he had Bootsy in there and his brother. And that was a real kicking band. So you get a 10-minute plus version of Sex Machine. You get classics like There Was a Time, Lick and Stick, Can't Stand Myself. A lot of the great late 60s stuff that he had just had hits with. It's all in there. And because James's band was always so sharp, they were always in the studio, they were always on the road, they were always playing. And the stakes were high because they would get fined if they screwed up a lot. So a James Brown live album is really about the best you're going to get because every cut has been chosen because for the most part it all fits in with his live show and the excitement that was generated there. So I got to go with Sex Machine as my first pick. What do you got?
Well, for my first pick, I've got from 1971, Sly and the Family Stone. There's a Riot Going On. Of course, this was more of the darker period for Sly and the Family Stone. Sly was very much in an experimental phase of his creativity, and then the band at that time was also kind of disintegrating, if you will. So Sly was kind of taking on this whole musical project. Mm-hmm. I guess some of the tunes that really stood out for me is Love and Hate, You Caught Me Smiling, Family Affair. Mm-hmm. Those three kind of encapsulated, his mindset at the time. His musical ideas really came through on that album. It's also one of the all-time great albums to just kind of zone out to. If you got a place, you got a man cave, you got a zone where you can chill, right. You can smoke up, smoke out, whatever you do, and right. Just vibe out. By the time you get to Thank You for Talking to Me, Africa, you get a long groove, right. And it puts you in a trance. It is one of those kind of awesome records to put you in a zone where you can just get into the music. Absolutely. And think your thoughts or not think, as the case may be. So yeah, this was one of my favorites too. Yes. Next, I'm going to get into a little Wild and Peaceful by Kool and the Gang. This is from '73, and it'd be hard to find one album that had as many all-time smash hits that are classic funk jams as this album. You got Funky Stuff. You got Hollywood Swingin'. Yes, you do. You got Jungle Boogie, right? That's enough right there. Those are all-time classics. But you also got my personal favorite, which is Life Is What You Make It, which is a very original sounding song. It's very, very stark and upfront in the mix, very in your face. Right. Has a very insistent Chenka guitar part to it. Mm-hmm. And I love the chorus. It's just one of those classic, one-of-a-kind funk jams. So, Wild and Peaceful is one of my personal favorites. Well, since we're on the subject of Kool and the Gang, I'll pick one from 1972, and that is Live at PJ's. there was one track in particular on that album entitled "Who's Gonna Take the Weight," a song that we as Calumet covered quite a bit.
Oh yeah,
also.
that was one of my favorites to play all the time.
Yeah, and I think what really stands out for me on that track is just the sheer horn energy and just the very creative horn parts on that song, along with that pretty repetitious chant, "Who's Gonna Take the Weight?"
Right, yeah.
But then you got some really nice changes and bridges in that tune. Just a very high energy and extremely funky song.
I think that what that song has meant to me is you don't need a lot of lyrics all the time. That influenced me to write our song called "Ain't Your Brother," where you have maybe just a couple of lines, but they're thought-provoking.
Absolutely.
And you just kind of think about those lines. So the line, "Who's going to take the weight," that they chant over and over again, it gets you thinking about the way things are going and whose responsibility it is to fix things.
Right.
So yeah, I think that song is definitely a major track for me too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Next one for me is "The World Is a Ghetto" by War. For me, this
Great
is
choice.
one of the best albums all the way through by anybody, because all the tracks are great. There's some classics on there. Obviously, the title track was a massive hit. But what you're getting is a fully realized album where there is no junk. There's no putting something in there to be a hit. I mean, everything is great, and if it's a hit, it's because it's great. One of my favorites of all time is called "City Country City,"
Yes. Love
which goes back and forth between this kind of sweet, lazy kind of groove, and it puts you in a certain frame of mind, and then it switches to this hard-ass urban sound, and it is a jam. And that track is killer. It just goes on, and you don't want it to end because it sounds so good. Also, another one of my favorites off of that album is called "Four Cornered Room," which is...
Yes.
That's some hard stuff, man. It's when you're confronting the reality of your life and you don't like what you see,
Right.
and you're stuck in whatever situation you're in. And the lyrics are stark. The music is beautiful in a really dark way.
Right.
I mean, the chords that the guitar's playing,
Yeah.
they definitely
Right.
make you feel things. So
Right.
that's one of my favorite songs off of that album.
One of my favorite tracks by them is called "Me and Baby Brother." Extremely funky again,
Are you-
up-tempo.
Picking the album to go with that, or are you just gonna throw that song out there?
I'll throw that song
Is
out
that
there.
All Day Music?
It is, in fact, it is on the All Day Music album. Yes.
That's another great one. It's a tough call because
Yeah.
some of these bands are so awesome that
Right.
they have multiple albums that you can go
Exactly.
with. I tried to kind of split the love up amongst all the great artists, but sometimes you just have to go with two.
of course, from that same album, we got "Slipping Into Darkness,"
yeah.
and that's another
Yeah.
song that the Calumet covered as
Oh
well.
yeah, we've definitely played a lot of that. These are all-time great songs. I want to jump to 1974 with "Standing on the Verge" of Getting It On. So the "Standing on the Verge" album by Funkadelic,
Yes.
to me, is a monumental release. It is a rock-edged, hard-ass funk album.
Yep.
And you could argue whether it's more funk or more rock. It don't matter. The songs are all great. There are so many great songs on that album. The guitar playing is ripping.
Yes.
The tones are Marshall Stacks.
Right.
It's an awesome album. And there you had that fantastic guitar player, Eddie Hazel.
Yes.
And he co-wrote all the songs, I think, with George Clinton. And, that album, probably as much as any of the Funkadelic records, has been an inspiration for me because it just illustrates that funk is a big tent where lots of different influences can come in, and
Right.
some can jump out more than others. But
Right.
that album is a ripping record. Any rock fan would dig it.
And speaking of that album, let's not forget "Red Hot Mama."
Red Hot Mama.
It's
That's
another song
Yep.
that we used to cover.
I know. We are knee deep in all these songs because obviously the way we feel about these songs has been with us for a long time.
Right.
So we've obviously
Absolutely.
over 20 something years we've incorporated some of the classics. My other favorites from Stand on the Verge are "Sexy Ways,"
Yes. Oh my
which
God.
that is one of the best songs ever.
Oh, love that too.
Best songs ever.
I think we covered that
We
one.
did
as well.
cover. We did cover that. It's funky, and then it's got an awesome hook. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just these are very catchy songs.
Right,
It
right.
doesn't matter whether it's hard rock or hard funk or whatever. These are just songs that stick with you. And then I'm gonna end my particular discussion on this album with "I'll Stay,"
Oh, I love that
which
one
is
too.
not necessarily hard funk or hard rock or anything, but it is one of those that puts you in a trance, man. That song is beautiful.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think we covered
Covered that one too, right? So, obviously when it came time to make the set list,
Right.
we were picking the choice cuts that
Right.
we were feeling on these records.
I'm going to add to your 1974 pick of Funkadelic and do the flip side of that and go with Parliament, which is basically the same band as we know. So, same year, 1974. How about the album Up for the Downstroke?
Yeah.
Okay.
I almost picked that one myself. That's a great album too.
Yeah, and that track.
And that was actually the first album under the Parliament name after several years, because
Right.
they originally had the core guys that were doing the Parliament and the Funkadelic records in the
Right.
late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
And that was basically like a 5-piece. But they put that aside for a bit, concentrated on the Funkadelic,
Exactly.
and then came back out in 74 with Up to the Downstroke.
There's another weirdly titled track called The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how sampled that tune was for the hip hop genre. That's another very funky track. I don't know if it really made any charting on the radio or anything.
No, I mean, see, back then they would have gotten maybe one single release.
Right. Exactly.
So it would have obviously been Up for the Downstroke.
Right,
And that's
Up for the
the
Downstroke.
classic that everybody knows, and deservedly so. That's a
Absolutely.
great track.
Yes.
Another fantastic track.
Yep.
My next pick is a record that, again, it's one of those perfect records all the way through. And this is from one of my all-time favorite bands, which is The Meters. And the album is called Rejuvenation.
Yes.
Also from 74. 74, perfect year. So much great funk happening. And Rejuvenation has got stuff like People Say.
Right.
It's got Hey Pocky Way.
Right.
It's got Jungle Man. It's got Africa. I mean, all these are banger funk tracks. And the other tracks that I'm not mentioning are all great too. It's just,
Right.
they get into some different colors and textures. But this is truly a great band. They didn't rely on a lot of studio techniques and effects and stuff to get their sound and make their music. It came through because of the great songwriting, the singing, and the playing that they
Absolutely.
had. And furthermore, being different than other groups, they played rather simply. They didn't have an extravagant slap and pop kind of bass
Right.
approach to things.
Right.
George Porter Jr. is a very fantastic bass player, but
Right.
he played in a simplistic style
Right.
that was just totally locked in the pocket. I mean,
Right.
it was all basic groove oriented, a lot of whole steps and things.
Speaking of the Meters, they were just immersed in that whole 70s funk movement, right? Another track that I love from them is called Running Fast. It was almost kind of like a Sly-esque approach to that song. Really kind of repetitive in terms of their chants, but musically, extremely funky. Yeah, the Meters.
Well,
Great
you're
call.
getting that New Orleans flavor on top of all that.
Absolutely.
So it's a different approach with the drums. They had a different approach with their vocals. So for me, that is the album that encapsulates the band at the peak of what they were doing. There's other stuff that's great, but that's my pick.
Isn't that Aaron Neville's brother also
Yeah.
performs in that band?
That's right.
Yep.
All right, what do you got next?
All right. Well, I got, once again, Sly and the Family Stone, of course, the Fresh album. And you talk about, see, this album is really another continuation of There's a Riot Going On, where Sly is pretty much, the main writer, composer of all the music, and performing primarily on all the songs as well. The three tunes that come to mind for me are In Time, of course, If You Want Me to Stay, which is a song we regularly cover, Frisky, and then Skin, I'm In. All of which are very eclectic, not your normal approach to writing music. You got the stuttering bass lines, but then you have like this off-time type of drum lines that are being performed by Annie Newmark.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this album is great because it does feature such a variety of tones. And, one of the greatest tracks on the album is really not funk at all, and it's the
Right.
most unlikely cover song
Right.
that anybody could imagine. It's a Doris Day song, which is Que Sera Sera.
Right,
But for all of us hardcore funk and soul fans, that track is one of the all-time greats.
Yeah.
The soul that he sings with on that
Yeah,
song is
yeah.
unbelievable.
Takes you to church.
And what's great is that you're getting this this wave you're riding of dynamics. You're not being stuck. It's not all, heavy funk tunes. It's not all, syrupy ballads. It's a mixture of funky stuff and middle range stuff, and then stuff that really takes you down and puts you into a cool mood, like Que Sera Sera. And this album has such a wealth of fantastic musicians on it. In the bass alone, you've got Rusty Allen.
Yep.
You've got Sly. You've got Larry Graham. I mean, all these dudes are on the same album.
Absolutely.
Because he was just, piecing it together, making it work after the lineup changes in Sly and the Family Stone the year before that.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely one of the greatest albums ever made.
Absolutely.
Good pick on that one.
Yeah.
My next pick is going to be Machine Gun by the Commodores.
Oh, yes.
This has got to be the greatest debut record of all time. I mean,
absolutely.
Every time I listen to this record, I'm marveling at how good it sounds.
Right.
How well it was mixed and recorded.
Right.
The tones of the instruments.
Right.
I mean, it's all so clean and in your face.
Yes.
And it's like the best sounds you could ever imagine for drums, for clavinet. The bass is kicking. I mean, everything is on point.
Right.
And then you got the songs, and the songs are fantastic too. I mean, the title track, Machine Gun, it's right up there at the top for like all-time great instrumentals.
Yeah, and speaking of Machine Gun, so Commodores they performed on Soul Train that same year, 1974. To debut that album, and of course that song, which I guess was a hit single.
Oh yeah,
a hit instrumental single.
That's right, and it's amazing they put that song out as the first hit single because these guys were a vocal band too, and they could sing very well.
Absolutely,
which we all found out once the next singles came out. But some of the other tracks that are fantastic on that record are Rapid Fire, I Feel Sanctified,
yes,
The
that's
Bump.
a good one. Yeah. I
mean these are all in the pocket grooves, and then there's one which maybe it's great, but for a different reason. It's called Superman, which, in my opinion, is probably the first or one of the first tracks to have the what would become the cliche bass line, that kind of octave approach.
Exactly.
And this is 74, so he gets away with it. He gets a pass on that. But he unleashed something that became unholy 4 or 5 years later, where everything had to have that sound. But yeah, Machine Gun, fantastic record.
Just wanted to shout out to the musicians in that band. Walter Orange, who was the other sort of lead singer in that band besides Lionel Richie. I don't know if people knew, but he was like the main drummer of the Commodores at that time. Walter Orange, and then of course Ronald LaPred on bass. Now I know the other gentlemen's names. The guitarist is in that band is excellent, and also their horn section. Fantastic, which Lionel Richie also plays.
Oh yeah, and if you watch that Soul Train clip of them, and it's not live, they're not actually playing, even though everything is set up and they're plugged in. But Lionel does play. He plays the synthesizer in that song. He doesn't play the horn like he normally did back then. And so this was a totally different band than what would happen a few years later when he became a solo artist and ended up writing all those songs that were like greeting cards. I mean, Machine Gun is a stone funk album all the way through. Every single track is funky.
Absolutely.
Every single track is great. And that was just one of the greatest debut records of all time.
Absolutely. Next for me, I've got Earth, Wind & Fire. That's The Way of the World from 1975. Of course, we've got Shining Star, which was their mega hit from this album. Shining Star. And then there's another track on here that is just incredible. You've got
Verdine White.
Yearn and Learning. But Verdine White on bass on this song called Happy Feelings.
That bass line is no joke. Next for me, I'm still in 74 here, so I'm going to go with Thrust by Herbie Hancock.
Great choice.
So alongside all the dance floor bangers and the songs with choruses and singing, Herbie was doing this instrumental funk that was really at the very peak of what was happening at the time. His band, some of the greatest musicians of all time. You had Michael Clarke on the drums, you had Paul Jackson on the bass, and these guys had a cohesion that was truly just one of a kind. So Thrust has only 4 tracks on it, but each one of them is just an amazing experience. The one for me that I personally got a lot out of as a musician was Spank a Lee, which has this bass part to it that is just amazing. And I spent many an hour jamming along with that one. So yeah, Thrust by Herbie is on my list.
Well, of course, again, the 70s, the period of funk, but also jazz fusion funk, if you will. And so Herbie Hancock was certainly one of those prominent artists that mastered the jazz funk fusion genre of music, along with Donald Byrd, along with Roy Ayers. So yeah, kudos to your choice there. Next for me is another Earth, Wind & Fire album. Actually, we'll stay in 1975, and we'll do the Gratitude live album. This is just a highly energetic live performance by Earth, Wind & Fire in their heyday, still kind of climbing to the top of their fame. But one tune in particular, which was really a studio track from this album, is called Sing a Message, which again is just a highly funky tune. The instrumentation throughout this album, live or in the studio, is just bar none. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
So now I got to go with one of my all-time favorite records, which is High on You by Sly.
Oh yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit in our episode on Sly Stone, but High on You is another great album all the way through. I mean, it's got mostly fantastic funk jams. It's got a couple of great ballads on it. It's just, for me, it's a perfect record.
Right.
And I love all the playing, the singing, the songs. The highlights are the title track, which is called High on You.
Right.
And then there's Who Do You Love?
Oh yeah.
There's Organize. There's Greed. There's
Yep.
Crossword Puzzle.
Oh,
So every
wow.
one of these is an all-time great funk jam.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So can't say enough good stuff about High on You. But
Absolutely.
I've said enough, so I'll let you go.
Of course, on that album, you've got Bobby Vega, who sparsely set in and played some incredible bass lines. Sly, of course, was still playing bass at that time on that album. You still had some of the Sly and the Family Stone members left in the group. Freddie was still around. Jerry Martini was still around. Cynthia Robinson was on that album. Crossword Puzzle and Greed, certainly one of my two favorites.
What you got next?
All right. Another Earth, Wind & Fire album from 1976 is called Spirit. This album, I would say maybe one or two songs charted. This is more of a spiritual album from Earth, Wind & Fire. They were a very spiritual band, of course. But the two funkiest tracks on this album that stood out in my mind is On Your Face and also Saturday Night. Just, again, some incredible bass lines. The rhythm section work from those guys, just always stellar. The horns, the vocals, Philip Bailey, of course, and Maurice White, and their harmonies. Excellent guitar playing as well.
It's right before they went supernova with the albums I Am
Right.
and All in All.
Absolutely.
They became the biggest band in the world.
Yeah, that is true.
My next pick is Chocolate City by Parliament from 75.
Oh, my goodness.
And what's fantastic about this record is we already knew that humor was a big part of the P-Funk universe.
Right.
Humor is in their artwork, it's in their liner notes, it's in the lyrics.
Right.
It's sometimes even in the music, in a musical way. You got some funny sounds
Right,
going.
right,
Chocolate City
right.
is one of those things that really has some insightful commentary about race relations and
Right.
politics and all kinds of other stuff. And he's focusing on Washington, D.C. And plugging in a
yes.
lot of soul and funk greats into positions of power in the U.S. government, just to kind of make some people uncomfortable, to make
Right.
them think, oh, wow.
Right.
And then he's got the tagline, gaining on you.
Right.
So he's
Right.
really trying to poke the bear. He's trying to tell people, our numbers are rising, so
Right.
you're going to have to deal with this.
Right.
And you can't keep hating on everybody all the time.
Right.
In not so many words. What I get out of that is just great combination of humor and insight. And as always, there's a message disguised in the playfulness and the comedy.
George also was not shy about writing some very funky love songs too. So on that album featuring Bootsy Collins, there's a couple of tracks that come to mind. One called Side Effect, which was, kind of a silly love song written by George Clinton, but extremely funky. Bootsy Collins is all over the place on that bass. And then another track, more or less, wasn't a radio track, but it was called Together.
Yeah, that's another one of those records it's a good listen all the way through. It's a good balanced
Absolutely.
record. It had the title track, which is basically the hit. And then maybe some of the rest of them are, familiar classics, but a lot of it is just good listening, whether or not it ever charted. All right, my friend, what do you got next?
And same year and same band, 1975, no one can forget the famous LP Mothership Connection, where you've got a whole slew of fantastic Parliament Funkadelic musicians. You got Glenn Goins, who was a fantastic singer, guitarist, Bootsy Collins, George Clinton, Grady, Fuzzy Haskins, Gary Scheider, also another great lead vocalist and guitarist from that band. But just mega funk songs.
Yeah.
One song in particular, I don't know if it charted or not, but it was just an extremely funky song called Handcuffs. If you check that album out, look up the song Handcuffs, and it will have you grooving.
I would put that album on the level or even a level above what I was saying about Wild and Peaceful, with tracks that are so monumental. I mean, you got Pfunk Wants to Get Funked Up, you got Mothership Connection,
exactly.
You got Tear the Roof Off the Sucker. I mean, and you got a handful of other great songs too, but
right.
Those songs were massive. They really changed the landscape at the time.
Right. Absolutely.
And because that was the last really great year of funk, it was like a launching pad. A lot of people were influenced by that, and their tour that went with that for a couple of years. I mean, that's a legendary embarkment that they went under.
Oh yeah.
My last pick here is a record by Tower of Power, which I'm not going to say is perfect all the way through like some of the other ones, but what it does have is a couple of tracks that to me capture the essence of Tower of Power, and I think that they deserve to be on the list just because they're such a fantastic band. Right. And that record is called In the Slot from 1975.
Awesome.
And the two standout tracks for me, one is called Ebony Jam, which is an instrumental, which is really this percolating, gurgling funk stew that goes on for like 6 or 7 minutes, maybe longer, I don't know.
Right.
And it is just incredible. It's a fantastic cut. You're getting the best of Rocco Prestia, all the guys in the band, all the playing is great.
Yeah.
The other cut is a James Brown style song called Drop It in the Slot, which is heavily syncopated. It has this cool octave riff and great chorus shout, little James Brown guitar wiggle at the beginning.
Right.
So it's kind of an homage to James Brown, but they did it so well.
Right.
Of all the groups, I always thought that Tower of Power was like James Brown 2.0 because they were such devotees of James Brown, but their band had even a higher level of chops and skill,
absolutely,
if that's possible, than the bands that James had. They had him to learn from, and then what they did was on another level entirely.
Absolutely. Yeah, the musicianship is just bar none in Tower of Power, and it always has been.
Yeah. You want to pick one more?
Sure, I'll pick one more. Tell you what, I was going to talk about the Commodores one more time as the album slips out of this very old LP cover. This was probably their most groundbreaking album.
That was their breakthrough as far as success.
Of course, everybody knows the song Brick House, but there's also some extremely funky tunes on here that most people may not know about. Squeeze the Fruit is one of them, and Won't You Come Dance With Me. Very, very creative songwriting, excellent performances instrumentally. The rhythm section is just on fire throughout this whole album. Great horn parts, great singing, great lyrics. Besides Brick House, this album is a great listen.
And don't forget, came with a huge ass poster, which was awesome back then. That poster was on my wall. It was a big ass band poster. It was that picture.
Oh, okay. Right.
Turned into a big poster. I would have to assume that the fruit in Squeeze the Fruit is Walter Orange.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. But he and Lionel Richie actually share the lead vocals on that song. And Walter's playing drums.
Yeah. That's a great pick. All right, let's do one more bonus pick since you got a few left there. I like that one right there. That's good, man.
Yeah, this is, of course, Brothers Johnson, 1976. This is a Brothers Johnson, Quincy Jones collaboration. Actually, Quincy Jones discovered Brothers Johnson the year before.
They played on Mellow Madness, I think.
That is correct. On that album, by the way, one of my favorite tracks is It Love That We're Missing? Extremely funky. So you've got the Brothers Johnson here, Lewis Johnson, George Johnson. So What you've got on this album is a track called Strawberry Letter 23, which was originally written by an artist that never really got his just due. His name was Shuggie Otis. And then the next hit for these guys on this album was called I'll Be Good to You. Extremely funky, all kinds of hooks, vocal hooks, slapping and pop bass going on. It's almost like a Parliament-esque type of a song with all these vocals happening, but very, very, very cool listen and a funky track.
And let's not forget, Get the Funk Out My Face.
Get the Funk Out of My Face is also on here. How could I ever forget that track?
That may be the best track on the whole album.
Absolutely.
We got Strawberry Letter is the best song.
Yeah.
But as far as pure funk, Get the Funk Out
Get
My
the
Face.
Funk
It's
Out of My
pretty
Face.
hard to beat that.
Absolutely.
On that note, we're going to wrap it up for today. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you on the next episode of this Funkin' Life podcast.
Please check out our Patreon page below for all kinds of exclusive content from our band Calumet. We have live concert clips, there's photos, unreleased songs, and more. We really appreciate your support.